we must go. We stay, we die, we must go. And I looked at him and I said, I can't do it. And he pulled me tighter. And I remember seeing this amazing, fantastic, weather-beaten Sherpa face, strength, resolute strength in his eyes. And he said, follow me.
My next guest is a mountaineer and author who has completed the 7 summits. He has recently come out with a book called Naked at the Knife's Edge, his harrowing story about climbing Mount Everest. And today on the podcast, I am delighted to introduce Vivian James Rigney to the podcast.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Well, it's an absolute pleasure. I'm delighted to have you on to sort of talk about your experience, which you did quite a number of years ago on Everest, and we'll get into that shortly. But at the beginning of all these podcasts, I always like to start at the beginning and how you sort of got into this sort of adventurous life, how your climbing sort of took off.
Yeah, my first memory about getting interested in the world was sitting in front of the TV, I think about 4 years of age, watching David Attenborough. And just watching programs about the world and traveling. Here was this guy who was traveling around the world, sitting with gorillas one minute, and then he was, in Australia the next, and the whole world that went around that. And I remember just being wildly interested in nature, animals, just the environment and the outdoors. And that was at a very, very young age. And it just expanded from there. And Ireland, originally from Dublin, Ireland, as you probably pick up from the accent, it's an island off the west coast of Europe. And it is, everyone looks kind of to the rest of the world. So everyone's looking to travel, people have family all over the world. So there's this innate interest in what's going on elsewhere. And I guess that also contributed.
Nice, because what is fascinating is you completed the 7 summits, which is a very rare thing. I mean, we've had a few people on, from Geordie Stewart to Lucy Rivers Buckley on the podcast, who have both done it. And probably on the podcast, the listeners think this is sort of a very normal thing, but actually the preparation, the detail that goes into it, and the experience you have to complete this undertaking is absolutely huge. Where did the idea first stem from?
So I did Kilimanjaro first. I was 26. And when I was in Kilimanjaro, I heard people talk about the 7 summits. And Kilimanjaro was just amazing. For the first time ever, I experienced altitude, because Kilimanjaro, you're climbing a massive volcano. So there's nothing technical about it until you get to 4,000 meters. And then you realize, why is my brain and my lungs are not connecting. My brain and my body is not connecting. My brain is saying, just walk, you're strong. And your body's saying, I can't walk, I don't have oxygen. So just going through that whole feeling and hearing about the 7 summits and the different continents and this wild adventure that existed out there. And the next mountain I did, I went to business school. The next mountain I did was Mont Blanc in Europe. I'm at the summit of Mont Blanc. We're all hugging each other. And I said to the guide, fantastic. We're at the highest mountain in Europe. And this French guy looked around and said to me, he had a cigarette hanging out of his mouth. He's a character. He said, no, technically it is not. It is in Russia. And I said, what? So at the top of Mont Blanc, after coming up through the couloir and everything, I was thinking, course correction, this is not the highest in Europe. So I came down the mountain humbled and just started to really do research on the 7 summits. Before then, it was just, I'll just do one at a time, and I didn't take it that seriously. And of course, you just start. I was working and I was studying and I was doing that. So I couldn't do one every year, but I could do one every couple of years. And I started to really focus on it and do one at a time. And so guess what? I did Elbrus next in Russia. And then after that, I came to South America to do Aconcagua. And that was a spectacular failure. So it was 3 weeks on the mountain. We got up to high camp. We had the summit in sight, and there was this massive windstorm. A few of our tents were destroyed. We lost some food. And the guide made a decision. We're going down the mountain. And it was incredibly, disappointing. 3 weeks of effort, flying halfway across the world. And that was a massive learning. And there was a humility that went with that also. Things you can control and things you can't control. And thereafter, I went to Carson's Pyramid in Indonesia. That was about rock climbing. That was very difficult to get to. We were very lucky to get up. It's hard to get to that mountain. Kosciuszko is the typical 7th summit people do. But that's only 2,600 meters. Carson's Pyramid is 5,000 meters, and that's serious stuff. So, and then I ended up going to Antarctica, which was mesmerizing, spectacular. It changed my life going down there. And then after, we went to Denali in North America, which was very cold, very technical, almost like a mini Everest. Weather was bad. We were there 3.5 weeks, almost 4 weeks. And then I always said I'd never do Everest. That was for the big boys. That was for serious people. But like an itch you can't scratch. And, people start saying to you, when are you doing Everest? And Irish people say, well done, congratulations, I heard you did Everest after a few pints. And, you're just going, look, is it me or is it the mountain? And the question was, it's probably me. I've done some mountains. I've learned a ton. And then I met somebody on a mountain who was organizing an expedition to Everest. And I asked him, 1,000 questions, and every answer was a good answer. It was a humble answer. It was a raw answer. It was a real answer. There was no messing around. And I absorbed, and I felt excitement coming within me with each answer I heard. And it was going to be a small team. There's going to be a dynamic team, small team, hand chosen. And, not people with big egos, people who were put the effort in, who were humble, but who were very focused and who weren't too fond of themselves. And it felt the values associated with putting that team together felt like a good fit for me. And I signed up, and that was 18 months before I did it. I didn't look at a video for Everest. I didn't want to read I didn't want to read Into Thin Air. I didn't want to know anything about it because I had a huge fear of heights. And that had always been the case. And I think we're born with that. I think we can, tape it down and kind of getting over it on the mountain. But it comes back. And so that was it. That was 18 months. And then I arrived in Nepal, and that was the beginning.
I think everyone has an innate fear of being scared of heights. The idea of, looking down. I don't know anyone. We had Tim Howe on last time, or the last episode, and he's a base jumper. And the idea, it's sort of so unnatural to look over a cliff and just throw yourself off, or even look down. And I think for a lot of people, it's exactly the same. Was the idea within Everest was because you'd done 7 summits, so surely in your mind, it was sort of brewing, wasn't it? After sort of conquering 7, you must have seen Everest and been like, this is the last one.
Or 6. Everest was the last one. I guess Everest has a reputation of just being extreme, and obviously the death rate is way higher than any of the others. And I was always aware of, I'm 2 months away, and I guess my own insecurities, was I strong enough? How would I cope under that pressure? All of those things, and the heights thing. I mean, the ladders. You look at some of those aluminium ladders going across crevasses. I mean, it's ugly stuff, and every year it's different. And it's this living glacier. And there's the Khumbu Valley. It's spectacular. So that was definitely in my mind, and until I met this person, and he answered all my questions, and it was an aha moment, and I said, it's me, it's not the mountain. And then I arrived in Nepal. The funny thing, I ended up reading Into Thin Air the week before I summited. I thought it was wise to read it in case there was any learning I could pick up along the way of things not to do during our summer descent. So finally, I read the book because it was on the table in the main tent. So it was too late at that point. Of course, there was no going back. I was in.
And and what you sort of talk about is the idea. Do you feel like a lot of times when people go, was there a lot of, you're talking about picking your team and moving away from the sort of big egos that were sort of, would do it for themselves? Was that very important? Did you get sort of the idea, or not the idea, but the sort of concept of picking your own team in order to make sure that your success rate was high and that everyone was going to look out for each other?
Yeah, good question. I picked the company I was going to climb with. It was a company who I climbed with. I'd been with them in Denali. I'd been with them in Carson's Pyramid. I'd been with them in Antarctica. I knew the owner of a co-founder of the company, and I knew his value system really clearly. And when I sat with this guide who he was hiring to run the Everest expedition, I asked all these questions. I knew the founder had told me, this is the type of team we will bring on board. We do not choose people with big egos. We choose people who are going to be safe, people who are going to work well together, people who were going to work well together as guides. And it's going to be small and it's going to be personal. And we expect high standards, and we will ensure this level of people coming on board. So it just felt they were doing all that homework for me. When I got to Kathmandu, I hadn't met many of the people before. 2 of them I did, but the other 5 I didn't. So that was it was a bit of a leap of faith. But again, his value system and the experience I had before were really clear. And we were a small expedition. There were other expeditions with maybe 10, 20, 30 people, more like a machine, and, great logistics, great coordination, all that. But you can just imagine you're part of something bigger, and there's just inherently more risk of people having different values and different ways of looking at what this represents. And you get under a pressure zone, stressful circumstances, those things tend to come out. So I was very happy to be with a small, tighter team.
And they were all very experienced climbers.
I think there were three out of the group, in addition to me, this was their 7th summit. So you can see that they were, and then, the rest had done different climbs around the world. So all international, mostly American, Irish, Polish. Yeah, that was it.
What do you think attracts people to Everest? What do you think really sort of gets them going back again and again?
I guess it was partly my own reason for doing the 7 summits. I mean, on the one hand, it was seeing the world, and that's it's a very comfortable answer, isn't it? You go around, see the world, and see beautiful places. But there's also an ambition in there to achieve and to prove oneself. And some people go to the extent of talking about conquering Everest, which is, pretty funny when you think of it. How do you conquer anything, right? Conquering yourself is a big enough Everest, I think, in life. But so I think that ambition was something which is driving me under the surface, and I think that impacted me on the mountain in significant ways. So it's covered in the book in terms of my personal journey, which was quite profound. And I went up the mountain one man, and I came down the mountain a very different person. So Everest was not just the culmination of the 7th of the 7 summits. It was almost like not being cliche about it, but kind of a rebirth of me. In Ireland, we say copping onto yourself, and just being crystal clear about who I was and who I wasn't. And having those things being in balance, probably for the first time in my life, that was the big takeaway for me.
So it was not like an epiphany or whatnot. It was, when you say you came down, who was the person that went up and who was the person that came down?
Yeah, so the person who went up was somebody who was super fit, very focused, trained well, conscientious. And I was fit, and I knew I was fit, and I had a good head, and I could just get my head down and work it. And on every day, on Everest, there's 3 rotations. Rotation 1 is from base. First of all, you got to get from the airport to base camp. That's about 10 days to acclimatize. Then you go from base camp up to camp 1 to camp 2, then all the way back to base camp for acclimatization and moving supplies. Then you go all the way camp 1, camp 2, camp 3. All the way back down to base camp, then down the valley to recoup and rebuild your energy, because your muscle mass has disappeared at that point. It's about 5 or 6 weeks in. And then the third rotation is the final one, come back to base camp. Everyone opens their laptops. Then we're looking at satellite weather because, with Everest, there's probably a 7-day window of summiting. It's really short and everyone was trying to judge it. And then off we go up to the summit, our summit bid, as it were. And that's about 6 days up and down. And I'd be doing really well in the rotation. Rotation 1, rotation 2. I was quick. I was fit. I was in good shape. And then the third rotation, I did well up to camp 3, camp 4. Then I was having problems with oxygen. I wasn't sleeping that much, and I started to deteriorate. But the head was strong. The body was weak. The head was strong. But nobody else was feeling great as well. So it wasn't as if I was the only one feeling tired or. But at some point on the mountain, we came up to the south summit. So you're climbing up through the balcony, all through higher and higher and higher, go to the south summit. And in front of you, there's this vista of Hillary Step. And it is profound fear when you look at that thing, because it is like climbing a wall and you see these people like ants climbing up. And before you get to Hillary Step, there is a 50-meter knife edge. 2,000 meters into Tibet and about 1,800 meters down to Camp 2, where I came from. So either way, it's, express route down to, your afterlife. So you look across this. And I got to this point, and the moment I saw this vista, I just went into, not panic, but I just looked and I said, I'm feeling bad. I'm not feeling good. I looked over. Our head guide was leaning against a rock and he was vomiting. He'd summited 4 times before and he said, I feel terrible. I don't think I can do it this year. I looked over other guide and his mouth was wide open. He was white. He was checking on me, Vivian, are you okay? And his eyes were popping out of his head. And I just looked and I felt incredibly exposed. And we weren't even through the knife edge and up Hillary Step. We were at that last point. And I went to a very dark place. And I just felt I've no energy. My oxygen, I was started to breathe, but there was no oxygen in my lungs. And a thought came into my mind of, I'm going to be stuck here. And this is where I'll rest. And there were kind of dark places. So I remember this, dark cloud coming over my head, metaphorically, and this voice inside me. And I was emotional because I felt as if this is it. This is not a way I want to go. And I closed my eyes. I remember my tears were frozen immediately because it was incredibly cold. And then I remember hearing this voice inside my mind. And the voice basically said, why are you here? Why are you here? And it kept coming. I'd never heard this voice before, deep inside me. And I didn't have an answer. I don't know why I'm here. And the next thing the voice said was, why are you always trying to prove how good you are, how smart you are, how talented you are, how hard you work? And I didn't have an answer to those questions. So here I am, almost at the top of Everest, having this discussion with myself. It's not what you imagine you're going to be doing on Everest. On top of that, you're feeling that I'm going to lean against this rock and I'll be here for the next 100 years and people will be tapping my helmet as they pass me for future expeditions. And it was and I basically just wanted to get away from this place. So I closed, as I say, my eyes were closed and I just started to think of something else. And I had a thought in my mind. The moment I had that thought in my mind, everything went away. The volume went down and I started to breathe again. And then I got a tap on my shoulder from the Sherpa, my Sherpa. And I opened my eyes and I had to rub them because they were all frozen. And he pulled my face next to his and he said, we must go. We stay, we die, we must go. And I looked at him and I said, I can't do it. And he pulled me tighter. And I remember seeing this amazing, fantastic, weather-beaten Sherpa face, strength, resolute strength in his eyes, and he said, "Follow me." And I surrendered, and I followed him. And he was taking one step at a time. He said, "Follow one step," and I followed one step, one step, one step. I came to halfway up Hillary's step. I have no recollection of the knife edge, no recollection of getting onto Hillary's step. And I remember coming to because his boots, his crampons were sliding down the rock. And I was trying to put my boot just exactly. I was so focused, John, on where his boots were. Nothing else mattered. I came to and I was thinking, Christ, he's taken me up. I thought he was going to take me down. And at that point, I'm halfway up the step. And I just kept focusing on his boots, his boots. Got up to the top, swung around a rock where there's basically a whole view of air, and got to the summit, slowly got to the summit. And people were excited at the summit. And I got to the summit and I said, why am I here? Now, I did say it's a nice view. I'm at the top of the world. Isn't that nice? There is nothing above me. Why am I here? How about that? And that was my summit experience. And I came down the mountain, and that processed all the way down, and had some interesting experiences down the mountain as well. But yeah, that's a long answer to your question about what happened with the summit and that experience. But it was extremely personal. And the ego basically was of no use to me. The ego was the heaviest rock in my backpack. And until I let go of that ego, I couldn't move. And that was that release, that vulnerability, which I never felt in my entire being. Yeah, it was a powerful experience. It's still powerful just even talking about it today. And that's hard to believe many moons later.
I think we've discussed at length on this podcast about how, I mean, it's that old cliche, it's the journey, not the destination. And as you say, most times when people get to where they're visualized, whether it's, finishing a massive race across the world or whether it's summiting Everest, when they get it, it's been the whole journey, years of preparation and everything put into it. And it's somewhat of mostly an anticlimax, and, we've had people on left, right, and center on this podcast, and they all talk the same about the finishing line was just this feeling of not emptiness, but of something they weren't imagining, which is sort of what you had.
Yeah. It's a connection with yourself, and all the projection of I'm really fit, I'm really competitive, it's going to be a great feeling, and I grab a flag, and it's all nonsense. It's a connection with yourself, and that compassion for yourself, and a humility, and you're naked, as it were. And it's so unusual, and it's so pure and so honest. And you just want to bottle it up and hold it. Yeah, it's profound. I think people who go through, near-death experiences, whether it be a car accident or something dramatic, you'll hear similar stories. Time slows down, and they go inside, and they go to a place, and it's fascinating. It's a reset. The idea is to kind of hang on to it, though, right? Because the busyness is waiting. The question is, how do you hang on to that? If that's the truth, then, we'd rather have truth, thank you very much, as opposed to distraction and everything else. So the sweet spot is to hold on to that and nurture it, because it needs nurturing. Nobody comes down and they're like just, levitating, happy on air, and, everything is all bells and sandals. The real world doesn't work like that. So you have to work at it. Like climbing a mountain, you have to come down the mountain. You have to work at coming down the mountain. You have to work at incorporating that into oneself. You have to work at being compassionate with yourself, and then being able to be compassionate with others. There's no free pass on that. But if you feel it, then it exists. If it exists, it's you. If it's you, that's the truth, and that's, you own the deeds of that. Nobody else owns those deeds. We tend to forget about this. And society right now, with so much distraction and social media, and there's all this and that and the other and all these experiences, but are we really connecting with ourselves? Are we listening to ourselves? Maybe it's not as easy as TikTok would make it believe. Right? Fun experiences, but with depth. Is there depth?
Did you find coming down the mountain, both physically and, let's say, mentally with yourself, as challenging as going up? In a sense, you were at the top and you had these thoughts. And, most people think when you're at the top, you are there going, wow, I'm on top of the world. But that wasn't for you. And then when you were coming down the mountain, was the realization of what you had done and what your thoughts were, and like processing those thoughts coming down the summit, was it, and putting them all together, was that just as a challenge as getting to the top and realizing?
Yeah, good question. Good question. A couple of things I'll share. So we reached the summit, and then we came down to the South Col, which is Camp 4, which is high camp. At that point, after being at the summit, we've been climbing for 20 hours nonstop. So you see South Col as literally like, Turks and Caicos. It is, you visualizing palm trees, because it just feels safe compared to what we've been through. And then we spend one night there, and then we come all the way down to Camp 2, and then finally back to Camp 1 after another night there. So I was processing. I got to South Col. I slept 5 hours solid, no dreaming. My brain was so empty. And I think my unconscious mind was just, it had been exposed. But I slept the best 5 hours of sleep I'd had in 2 months. So that was a win. Then I got Camp 2, and I wanted to call my family. And, I grew up, my father was a climber, a mountaineer, in the Alps, and then Kilimanjaro, Mont Blanc, and so forth. So I guess it was something in the family. But tough guy, and wouldn't give us too many compliments. But he'd tell our friends he was very proud of us. But he always expected a high bar from us, and it was always about you got to work hard, and you got to prove yourself, and all that good stuff. So I called my folks. I knew they were worrying about me. Satellite phone, the Irish ring. It's a bit like the Ireland used to be part of the UK. So we have the kind of the ring, that very distinct ringing tone. And I'm there. There's a full moon. It's freezing cold. And I'm on the satellite phone. And then I hear this voice. And yeah, his voice. And it was a hello. And I felt the warmth of my dad's voice, and I cried. And I cried. It poured out of me for 1 minute. I don't think I'd ever done that in my life. And after 1 minute, it stopped like a thunderstorm. But in that 1 minute, what I felt was a connection with my family, with the sacrifices my parents had made, the fact that dad was tough on me, but wanted the best for me. And I felt that, and it was incredibly powerful. And then after 1 minute, I caught my breath, and we had a conversation. I said, "How are you?" And he told me he was very proud of me. And it was a big deal. And again, it was interesting, isn't it? At the top, it was about me and accepting myself, and why the heck am I having to prove? And I speak to my dad, kind of halfway down, and it's about realizing what family is and what matters, and what was always there. But sometimes we just focus on the tough stuff, or we focus on, this, that, and the other. But the core was there, and the warmth and the love was there. And the one word I felt when I spoke to him was love. And that was a powerful word. And And then I got through the Cumbo Icefall, and then I got to the bottom. And I'll tell you one more funny story, because Irish people always tell you stories. I spoke to a family member, and they said, "Oh, I spoke to Dad, and he told me," and I told my dad it was really difficult, and I didn't think I'd make it, in that call with him. And they said to me, "Listen, I heard from Dad that you said you almost didn't make it. You don't need to worry about that. You got to the highest point on earth. That's all you need to worry about. Don't you worry. You just tell people you've got to." And I felt immediate anger. How about that? I felt anger. I felt frustration. And I shot back and I said, "That's so wrong what you're saying to me. What I went through and the toil and the questioning, that is the story. That is the story of Everest. And I'm going to tell it to everyone that listens. And the person the person that you know is a different person. That is the story." And it was funny, wasn't it? It was that for me was like the third piece that completed things. And that was the piece that really resonated. So that kind of put a full stop on it. And came down the mountain then, and that process for years. That kind of that idea of what is vulnerability, and what is being free of our egos and our personas and all of that. It's a massive release. So yeah, coming down was just as hard as going up. That's the net of all of that.
I think that's so true. I before the pandemic was traveling all over the place, and actually the one thing the pandemic has probably given me is that sense of just how important family is. You sort of I was traveling all over the world, and actually when I got back, I there wasn't any part of me that felt, oh, I need to get out, I need to go. It was actually just how important family is in life, and just that sort of circle around you. And also it sort of just not makes I think it's also, but you need to sort of find that before you can actually really appreciate it, in a sense.
Yeah. And of course, in the world we have, things can happen quickly, and then somebody passes, and then you don't get a chance to have that moment, right? Which is, sometimes we don't get to control those things, right? But that healing of yourself is the minimum we must do, right? To heal with others, it's ideal, but at least to heal with yourself, that's powerful.
No, I agree. And then, so after you had sort of, come back down from Everest, probably breathing a little bit better.
Right. Yeah.
And you sort of talked about legacy and the sort of importance of it. What would you say that the legacy that you took from Everest back to New York or to Dublin, where you were living? The idea of conquering, as you put it.
There's an angle. I'll tell you a story as part of that answer. So we got back to Kathmandu, we had a nice dinner, and I had a flight 4 days out. And I said, I am not going to change my flight and go back to New York. I'm going to take a little bit of me time. I've been with the same people for almost 8 weeks. It was time. I just wanted to literally go to a place, be a hermit for a while. So I found this whole country club in Kathmandu. The place was kind of run down, but it was like, I just wanted a hotel beside the jungle. I hadn't seen colors for 2 months. Think about that. I'd seen rock, ice, and sky. That's all I'd seen. So I just wanted something with vibrancy. So I went to this place, as I say, a little run down, but it was almost like colonial type, beautiful, beautiful old building. And I got on the golf course there, and I'm reflecting on Everest, and I hit my ball on the green, and on the green, there's a few monkeys there. And one of the monkeys took my ball, and I just started laughing. And I couldn't stop laughing. I was on my own. And it was just the funniest thing ever, And I just said, this is life. This is life. This is to be playful. This is to just be here. There's a monkey grabbing my golf ball. I've just seen my soul on Everest, and I've been through, this wild experience for 2 months. I'm traumatized from it. And there's a monkey running off into the forest with my golf ball. It was just, that idea of bringing that back to New York, the idea of being present, the idea of understanding what being playful is, of being curious. And New York is wonderful because it's like a melting pot, a bit like London. It's this massive melting pot of everybody. There's an intensity about it, but there's an intensity about everything, but also people are from everywhere, but nobody really judges each other or cares about each other because everyone's in it together. And I remember walking the streets of Manhattan for a few weeks after I'd come back, and I couldn't take this inner smile off my face. It's hard to, and people would respond to me. It's quite interesting. People pick up on our visual. They pick up on where we are with ourselves. And I was back to my job and I was kind of doing my thing. And that's something I've been reflecting on probably for the last few years, is that idea of just, it all goes by so fast. With COVID and the pandemic, pressure points, stress points, but at the end of the day, we are with ourselves and we create our happiness. Yes, we meet people around us to make us happy. Yes, we have experiences, but it comes from within. And so the monkey and the golf ball is still in my head many, many, many times. And I'm probably the monkey, and hopefully chasing a golf ball and not caring certainly as much. And I haven't done any tall mountains since the 7 summits. So I took up scuba diving. I've been traveling extensively, 80 plus countries so far, and before COVID, of course, and just really enjoying not having an agenda per se, like a wild agenda, an agenda of sorts, a framework, but nothing to must tick boxes, none of that. So
with the sort of monkeys, there must have just been like, after 8 weeks of just complete seriousness, to sort of almost have it was almost like a joke really in front of you, that's sort of lighthearted after 8 weeks of just intensity, really.
Right. I think life put monkeys on that green to take my golf ball and slap me across the face a few times. And it immediately, like, bing, bing, the lights went on like in half a second. Like, that's why I laughed for like at least 4 or 5 minutes. It was wild.
And I think what's just so interesting is you've got this book coming out, Naked at the Knife's Edge, and you've had sort of 10 years to sort of really reflect on these stories, to really sort of delve into them deeply and to get a better understanding. A lot of the time people sort of think, oh, you can just sort of reel it off. But actually a lot of these big trips and expeditions, they take time to really reflect and to really understand yourself within it. Is that what you found?
Correct. If I wrote the book a year or two after, it would have been more descriptive. And then we did this, and then we did that, and then this happened. It would have been the usual. Most people write books on Everest, right? It's a significant achievement. But the fact that I didn't do that, and at the time I was kicking myself, and I was, you're such a procrastinator, you and your big talk. But I think when COVID hit, everything just felt like I've got all the pieces of the jigsaw now, and it's way larger than that little myopic view that would have been the case, because it takes time to process these things. It takes time to process. It's fascinating. You don't get to control that. You can work on yourself. You can, help yourself with different things, more self-awareness, all that good stuff. But time is a healer, and with time, wisdom also comes with time. So it happened at the time of its choosing, and I went onto the mountain again and writing the book. It was fascinating. I was there, and that surprised me immensely.
Well, Vivian, it has been such a pleasure sort of listening to the story. There's a part of this show where we ask the same 5 questions to each guest. First question might be a little different because you've sort of taken up scuba diving rather than mountaineering now. But what's the one gadget that you always take with you on your trips and expeditions or adventures?
Gadget. That's a good question. I don't have a gadget of choice. A gadget of probably my passport would be the one thing wherever I go. It's like in my backpack. I go to work, I have my passport in the backpack. It just reminds me of this. I'm a citizen of travel, and it's always there. Even though I'm going to work, it's in my backpack, and yeah, it never leaves. It's strange, but yeah, that's my gadget. It's less of a gadget, more of an anchor, right? Um,
Okay. What about your favorite adventure or travel book?
Shackleton South. Ernest
Okay.
Shackleton's trip across Antarctica. I mean, it's a story beyond beyond the human capacity. It's exceptional, and it's as much a leadership story as anything else, in how he motivates people to stay alive and to keep busy and organize themselves. And the beautiful powers of delegation, motivation, delegation, and respect. And this is 110 years ago. It's way before its time. And he died at
Yeah.
41 years old. So it's kind of, it's just amazing that he had all that, in his 20s and 30s.
Yeah, it's a phenomenal story. I think, even it's funny because you always sort of talk about, as we've been sort of speaking, the best stories are the ones which have that sort of challenge, that adversity, those struggles. A story of like, he went to Antarctica and crossed it with no problem. Most boring story in the world. But the fact that he had all those challenges is sort of 100 years later is still one of the great stories, one of the great adventure stories of its time.
Exactly.
Why are adventures important to you?
Curiosity, learning, being present. So I think adventures just open your mind to like almost like an Aladdin's cave of unfamiliar things and experiences and people's voices and languages and cultures and nature and color and all of it. It's all there. It's all there waiting.
What about your favorite quote?
It's not the mountain we conquer, but ourselves. And that's by Edmund Hillary. And it's funny because he was a very introverted guy and, very matter of fact. But I think that quote, it's so deep and powerful. It's not the mountain we conquer, but ourselves. It says it all in such a perfectly concise way.
No, very nice. And people listening are always keen to travel and go on these big expeditions. What's the one thing you would recommend for people wanting to get started?
I think people have experienced the last lockdown and everything the last 2 years. The world out there is exceptional. And that with climate change and everything, quite a bit of it is changing. So I would invite people to experience as much as you can some of the things that are changing that mightn't be here in 20 years or 30 years, mountains or oceans or whatever it may be. But there's a lot of warmth out there. A lot of warmth with people, a lot of warmth with just being present with yourself and listening to yourself. So whatever, if that's going to another city, it's going to another country, going to another continent, it's the same recipe. So
very nice. Couldn't have said it any better. And finally, what are you doing now and how can people follow you, and also about your new book?
So the new book is going to be released on March the 8th. It's going to be a hardback. It's going to be on audible.com. So there'll be an audio version. So you hear my dulcet tones reading through the experience. And it'll be an ebook format, of course, as well. From my side, as I said, I haven't done mountains. I'm trying to get to some amazing national parks. So I've been doing that, doing a lot more skiing and scuba diving. I took that up about 6 years ago, and getting under the water is just amazing. It's a whole new part of the world that I didn't know much about before. And It's amazing, and I'm in my bed every night. No more camping. No more. No more sleeping in a tent. Which after Everest, I think I was cured of being cold in a tent at night. So I'm happy to be in warmer climes, perhaps. Yeah.
And what's the temperature in New York at the moment?
So we were minus 8 this morning Celsius. In Fahrenheit, that's about 20 degrees. So yeah, 18 degrees. I was 18F. I was chilly. And then regarding the website, so it's vivianjamesrigney.com. Yeah, that's the book. And as a career, I do executive coaching. So I work with senior leaders and senior execs, and I help them to summit their own Everests and be more emotionally intelligent along the way. So that would be the sweet spot of what I do in my day job.
Absolutely amazing. Well, Vivian, it's been such a pleasure listening to your stories, and I cannot thank you enough for coming on today.
Great. It's been a pleasure. And thanks for the great questions. And it's great to share the journey with you, John.